Here's a Wikipedia story. 156 years ago this month, the Dakota War of 1862, also known as the Sioux Uprising, was an armed conflict between the United States and several bands of Dakota, also known as the Eastern Sioux. It began on August 17th of 1862 along the Minnesota River in southwest Minnesota, 4 years after Minnesota's admission as a state. Throughout the late 1850s and the lead-up to the war, treaty violations by the United States and late or unfair annuity payments by Indian agents caused increasing hunger and hardship among the Dakota. During the war, the Dakota made extensive attacks on hundreds of settlers and immigrants, which resulted in settler deaths and caused many to flee the area. An intense desire for immediate revenge ended with the soldiers capturing hundreds of Dakota men and interning their families. A military tribunal quickly tried the men, sentencing 303 to death for their crimes. President Lincoln would later commute the sentence of 264 of them. A mass hanging of 38 Dakota men was conducted on December 26, 1862 in Mankato, Minnesota. It was the largest mass execution in United States history.
An exciting view of a bear out in the wild out on Highway 2 between Erskine and Mentor Sunday evening quickly turned horrifying for an iNewZ viewer and family. A warning, you're about to see a bear get hit by a truck and trailer. The bear does manage to limp back out into the woods at the end of the video. Again, a warning, do not view if you don't want to see this. A bear is hit, but then does limp away.
Oh my god! Oh, back up! Oh my god! Mom, I can't! Mom, no! Don't look, Mom! I'm gonna cry. Just trying to get a video here. Seriously, what do you do when a bear just got hit by a semi? What do you do?
He's gonna make it.
You think he'll make it?
No, I can't look.
Presley, shh. Presley.
No.
Oh god. Oh my gosh. Did that guy not see the bear running towards him?
Must not have.
Oh, it looks like he just broke his leg, Presley.
Yeah,
Neil Carlson here at 7:20 a.m. Give you a little better look, a little more daylight here. This is the corner of Columbia Road and 17th Avenue South. We have streets all over town closed. Columbia Road going south here from 17th toward the mall is closed. Try to zoom in down here. You'll see why. Got cars stalled all over down there in deep water. Nowhere to go, and this is kind of happening all over town. As I said earlier, I talked to the National Weather Service, who said by 1 a.m. this morning there were 4.7 inches of rain had fallen in Grand Forks, and there's a lot of rain falling after that. So we're looking at around 5 inches of rain here. Look up by that American Inn sign. You can see a car stalled in the driveway there. Many more stalled down here. We'll walk down over here. There's more cars coming down 17th. These are cars going westbound coming up to Columbia Road. Farther down 17th there's other stalled vehicles. Went too fast, motor got wet, and they're done. Again, also on South Washington Street, there's a lot of cars stalled. Tow trucks have been working all night, but don't have all the cars off the streets yet. If you don't have to be anywhere this morning, it's best to stay home. Let the storm sewers catch up and pump, get all this water pumped out into the river, so streets can get freed up here. So again, we've had, according to the National Weather Service, by 1 a.m., 4.7 inches of rain in Grand Forks. and more rain, so a lot more rain since then. So we're looking at around 5 inches of rain here in Grand Forks. We have an update regarding that stolen Grand Forks Police squad car and death of a man yesterday. This in from Grand Forks Police. The male subject in the incident is being identified as Jordan Lee Poitra, 33 years old. Mr. Poitra's permanent address is still being established, but he did have ties to the Grand Forks community. Several additional details have been learned through the incident investigation, and so the overall incident description is updated as follows. On Monday at approximately 5:05 p.m., Grand Forks Police Department officers were dispatched to the Dollar Tree parking lot for a male subject with an unknown problem. The subject was located and officers began conversing with him. He was identified as Jordan Lee Poitra. During the course of that conversation, officers were alerted to the fact that Mr. Poitra had a failure to appear warrant for his arrest out of Cass County, North Dakota. When attempting to place him under arrest for the warrant, the male actively began fighting with officers. Over the course of the fight, Mr. Poitra attempted to disarm at least one of the officers, and to correct the earlier report, the officer's holder was not broken, but had been manipulated in Mr. Poitra's attempt to withdraw the officer's sidearm. At least one officer deployed a taser in an attempt to subdue Mr. Poitra, but was unsuccessful. The male disengaged from officers and fled the scene in the patrol vehicle. The involved officers were later treated and released from Altru for minor injuries sustained during the course of this incident. Mr. Poitra fled the scene on West 17th Avenue South at a very high rate of speed. He drove through the termination of 17th Avenue South and continued through the fence protecting Interstate 29 and turned north on the interstate. Mr. Poitra traveled a short distance on the interstate before angling to the west, crossing the median northbound, traveling to the north-northwest, and striking a southbound semi-tractor trailer in nearly a head-on collision. The collision left the semi disabled and partially off the roadway. The patrol vehicle was destroyed and Mr. Poitra deceased. There was no active pursuit at any time during this incident. The Grand Forks Police were assisted by the Sheriff's Office, Highway Patrol, University of North Dakota Police, Grand Forks Fire Department, Altru Ambulance, Grand Forks Police Collision Analysis Reconstruction Team, and the Unmanned Aerial Systems Team. The investigation remains ongoing.
In an emergency situation at any time, there are some very valuable people to have around, and Mr. P.C. Davidson is one of them, the operator of the Fargo Moorhead Ambulance Service. And particularly in weather like this service becomes very acute and sometimes very strained. Let's talk about the last few hours that you've had, Dave. How many runs have you had to make today?
I see, today I think we've only had 4 since daybreak this morning. We didn't have any during the night last night, but the night before we were busy all night.
You had a little tough luck with the weather this morning. You had to get through with plows and police department help and everything else on one run. Would you tell us about that?
Well, that's right. I can't say enough good about the cooperation we get. It seems that people are really concerned about when someone needs an ambulance someplace. And we had one run this morning where they required an ambulance right away. A person who had been sick became sicker, and we made it over there with the help of 2 police squad cars and a snowplow. And it only took us about an hour to get the patient to the hospital.
Good afternoon, I'm Bruce Taylor, and we're going to present at this time all of the information, news stories, public service announcements, and everything that we have available on the storm and the weather conditions and the whole works at this time. To start off with, the North Dakota Highway Department reports severe storm conditions prevail over the state, with the exception of the northwest corner. Through most of the remainder of the state, travel is impossible because of zero visibility and blocked roads. The department says absolutely no attempt should be made to travel in the storm area. Freezing rain is blamed for the partial collapse of the new Northside High School gym at Fargo, but no injuries are reported. Police at Dickinson, where there are 6-foot drifts in the downtown area, are issuing citations for unnecessary travel. Governor William Guy's office said that heads of the Departments of Civil Defense, Highways, the National Guard, and the Highway Patrol are keeping abreast of the situation. Now with more reports, here's News Director Larry Mills.
Thanks, Bruce. We do have a number of reports. This is a special report on the weather situation, blizzard conditions throughout the area. A number of people are reported missing in the storm. 3 coaches from the Fort Yates High School basketball team, Harlan Wash, James Barrett, and Alan Mussenberger, left Mandan last night and have not returned home. They left Mandan by automobile after the Class A Southwestern basketball tournament games, but have not been heard from since. Earl Bonenberger, who left Jamestown yesterday, has not been heard from and is to call Ray Albright. Mr. and Mrs. Tupke of New Salem have not been located, and they were traveling from Glenolden to New Salem yesterday afternoon. They're asked to call the Kirkmeyers in New Salem. Stan Hetzler, Monroe Chase, and Jay Ermentrout, who flew to Harvey last night in a small plane and who left Harvey for Sterling by automobile last night, have not been heard from. School Superintendent Julius Worley of Waukepulla, South Dakota, left Mobridge last night with 2 teachers, Dale Lewis and Keith Bokel, bound for Waukepulla, and they were found this morning by a game warden traveling in a snowmobile. Mr. Gilman reportedly left for Mandan about noon following a truck, but he has not been heard from since. Bruce?
A Sioux Line Railroad crew reportedly is stranded somewhere between Wishock and Pollock, South Dakota. Crewmen are urged to telephone the Sioux Line station or their homes. Jack Sauer, said to be in the Dickinson vicinity, has not been heard from. In South Dakota, W.C. Campbell called his wife from a ranch 2 miles east of Spearfish and said he was on his way home to Whitewood at 8 o'clock this morning, but has not been heard from since. Mr. and Mrs. Edwin Johnson of McCluskey left for Flasher yesterday. Anyone knowing their whereabouts is asked to have them call Mrs. Marvin Schick of Bismarck or Mrs. Henry Johnson of McCluskey.
You know, adversity really brings out the good in people. Take the case of Bismarck psychiatrist Russell Saxvik. He was out trudging through the snow-clogged streets today of Bismarck carrying medicine to sick children. Dr. Robert Tudor, a Bismarck pediatrician, reportedly was one of the few doctors who were able to make it to a Bismarck hospital, and now is busy caring for patients. So Saxvik turned up to take the medicine and drugs to sick children, walking through the snow door to door to Tudor's patients in Bismarck, delivering the medicine.
A stirring drama is being played out in a farmhouse near New England, North Dakota. Mr. and Mrs. Claire Strom are there at the home of Charles Olson, awaiting the birth of the Stroms' child. The Stroms and Olson started out this morning for New England and a hospital. However, the storm turned them back, and they were stranded for a while at a rural schoolhouse. The schoolhouse had heat and a telephone, and the Stroms' plight was relayed to the Dickinson office of the State Highway Department. A snowplow with Strom's father riding inside started for the schoolhouse, but was unable to reach it because of zero visibility. This information was relayed back to the stranded people, who then decided to head back for Olson's farmhouse. They are there now, after a trip of only a mile, but during which they almost drove off the road, in Strom's words, 5 or 6 times. If the weather doesn't clear up, the baby will be delivered there by Mrs. Olson, who will be receiving instructions over the telephone from a nurse at New England, who will be relaying the instructions from a doctor.
The female victim in a murder and arson investigation in Thief River Falls has not been named yet, pending positive identification from the Ramsey County Medical Examiner. However, the suspect in this case, 23-year-old Devin Poluzinski of Thief River Falls, has now been formally charged with second-degree murder and first-degree arson. According to the criminal complaint, on Wednesday evening, firefighters responded to a blaze in the upstairs apartment of this home and found a female body inside the apartment. The female was lying face down in the kitchen and had extensive burns on the back of her body. The hands looked to be bound behind her back. Her feet appeared to be bound by some type of material. Pluzinski lived at the apartment with James Shagabe, who had already been arrested last Friday following a drug investigation here. 3.5 hours after the fire Wednesday night, Pluzinski was arrested in Thief River during a traffic stop. He was a passenger in a vehicle. According to court documents, while under arrest, he uttered the following in front of officers, quote, "They had nothing to do with it, was all me," unquote. Officers also have text messages between Pluzinski and Shagabe while Shagabe was in jail. One says, quote, "I'm doing them before I leave," unquote. The pair had been under a drug investigation that involved a confidential informant making purchases. Back at the death scene, a fire marshal concluded that gasoline had been used to start the fire. If convicted, the second-degree murder charge carries a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison. The first-degree arson charge carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. We have some breaking news out of northwest Minnesota. This is video from the Roseau Times Region newspaper. A major explosion at 4:30 p.m. On this Friday that could be felt all over town. This is at John's Auto Salvage on the edge of town here. No reports of any injuries yet. I just talked with a person at the Roseau Times region who will be having updates on this story shortly. We'll pass those along as soon as they're available. Again, a major explosion at John's Auto Salvage in Greenbush, Minnesota on this Friday. I'm Neil Carlson reporting for iNewZ.TV.